And then the Catechism says that church is gathered and defended and preserved by Christ's Spirit and Word. That is, by the Spirit of Christ and the Word of Christ. That does not mean by the Spirit of Christ and the Word of the Scriptures, although that's behind it, of course, but it means by the Word which Christ preaches. That's the meaning. The Spirit that Christ sends out and the Word that Christ preaches. That's how he gathers his church, defends his church, and preserves his church. And you don't have to have a congregation of 500 or 1,500 people for Christ to be present. Oh no. He says to his church, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am in the midst of them. 2 or 3. That's all it takes. I'm there, and I'm gathering my church, and I'm defending my church, and I'm preserving my church by my word and by my spirit. And that means, first of all, of course, that the church is gathered and defended and preserved by the preaching of the gospel. That's how. No other way. Preaching of the gospel. It's defended by the preaching. It's preserved by the preaching. It's gathered by the preaching. That's the means that God has ordained. There's no other way. No other way. Just the preaching. Because when the preaching takes place, Christ is speaking his word. Let's be clear on that. Christ speaks. I was thinking about that yet this morning when I was thinking about my sermon. You better remember, I said to myself, you better remember, you're standing in the place of Christ. And I tell you, boy, if you want something that puts you on your knees, that's it. That's it. You're there in the place of Christ. And Christ speaks. Christ speaks through the preacher. That's Paul in Romans 10, as clearly as you can possibly make it. But where the word is preached, and where Christ speaks, that's because Christ has, through his church, ordained a minister to be an ambassador of Christ. That's the scripture. Beloved, do you understand that? Do you understand that when the gospel is preached, there are forces unleashed through that preaching of the gospel that make the mightiest explosion of an atomic bomb look like the feeble pop of a small firecracker? That when the gospel is preached, it can do things that no power in heaven and on earth can do. More powerful than an earthquake that destroys an entire city. No more powerful than a tsunami wave that sweeps over land and destroys everything in its path. The gospel makes saints out of sinners. Transforms them. Cleanses them from sin, preserves them in the midst of the world. Why? Because it's Christ who speaks. That's why. We must not despise the preaching. We must not ignore it. We must not act as if we don't need it. We must not be critical of it. It's the power of God unto salvation, and that power is earth-shattering. Power of the gospel plucks out of a fallen human race the elect of God. The power of the gospel transforms sinners into saints. The power of the gospel brings you and me in this world where everything is against us, including my own flesh, safely to the shores of eternity. The gospel does that because it's Christ's word. And that word is made powerful and effective and given its power by the Spirit. Because where the word is proclaimed, the Spirit works. The Spirit ties himself to the word. He binds himself with unbreakable chains to the preaching of the gospel. And all the work which the Spirit performs is always in connection with the gospel, so that Christ from on high at the right hand of God proclaims his word in the world and sends forth his Spirit into that same world along with the word, and by the work of that Spirit in the hearts of the elect, the church is gathered and defended and preserved. That's the doctrine of the church. I say, beloved, that's an article of faith. I can't see that. I can't see the Spirit at work here in the world. I can't see the Spirit at work in your hearts or in my own heart. I can't even understand that work. The canons, when they talk about that work in chapter 3, 4, 12, say it's mysterious, inexplicable, that is, beyond human description. And yet, say the canons, it is as efficacious and powerful as the creation of the world and the resurrection from the dead. That's what the canons say. I like that. Even the creation of the world in all of its powerful work of God does not compare with the work of the gospel, the power of the Spirit of the exalted Christ in the hearts of his people. And don't forget, when the Spirit was poured out on Pentecost, it was not only poured out here on the church on earth, but the church in heaven as well. The whole church received the Spirit. And by that work of the Spirit, a work of God is performed that makes every work in this creation pale in comparison. I believe that. I believe there is an elect church, the body of Christ.